Welcome to Law and Licensing. I think I can see everybody out there.
Wow.
This is really weird.
This is weird.
So we'll go ahead and just quickly have everyone introduce themselves. I believe that's you, Linda. Is that you?
I'm actually downstairs, but I'm actually here.
Yeah, that way. Go ahead.
Travis Rawlings, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the State Board of Education.
Okay, and then we'll go behind you and we'll end with the guy in the front with
I'm Kate Croo. I'm here with the Student Advisory.
And her awesome mom, Barb.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Brian Olmstead, coordinator here in the office, adult risk and custody program. Mark Clement, USBE and Alpine School Board.
And Eric Round with the Charter School Association.
Wonderful. Okay, welcome to Law and Licensing. We will start with the first item on our agenda, which is a Board Policy 5008, and it's the Student Advisory Council. And I will turn the time over to Angie to introduce that.
That's great. And I apologize, I was just going to get connected here, but Board Policy 5008, you'll remember that last month this committee had a discussion about student advisory councils, and I wanted to bring to your attention that as in support of that, Jeff Van Holten, who unfortunately couldn't join us, he's over in standards covering on some other rules, but he prepared a 50-state survey, which is attached to board docs, describing what other states do. Approximately, I think it's about 30 states or around 30 states have some sort of student advisory, either committee or a representative who sits on their board as either generally a non-voting member of the state board. So hopefully that's helpful. And then based on that survey, we met, Jeff and I, with Board Member Hanson and Chair Bolter, as well as Kate, who's here with us today, and kind of flushed out, based on the committee action, which was to go and bring a draft back to the committee for further consideration. So we've got Board Policy 5008 here for your review. And I don't know if you'd like me to kind of go through the board policy and kind of summarize, or if I didn't know if Board Member Hanson, if you wanted to participate. Would you like me to go through the board policy?
Yeah, let's go through the board
Okay.
policy.
And Ben, could you do me a favor and just connect and show the policy? It'll make it easier for me. Thank you. So the main points, it describes the purpose and duties, which is similar to all of the advisory councils that we have. Most notably is to review board committee agenda items as well as general board items and provide feedback and give the students perspective on these large policies that you are all considering. The board policy states that they shall meet at least every other month and may meet electronically. There's no minimum or maximum number of how many of those meetings are electronic or in person. If you'd like, we could add that, or we could keep that flexibility to the committee for them to determine when they meet. The other thing it mentions is that those members of our Student Advisory Committee could come and testify and present and provide feedback to the board. A person, a member of staff appointed by the superintendent would act as kind of the facilitator and support to this committee and help provide you all the agendas and then minutes. And you've seen that with some of the other committees that we have. You'll see staff, they'll send you all an agenda a couple of days in advance and then minutes. So that will continue to be the same as we do with other advisory committees. The membership, so I'm in section 5 now, Ben, if you want to scroll down there. We'll have 15 student members, half who are juniors and half who are seniors. So for this first year, the senior members would only have a 1-year term, but the junior members, the idea is that when students are appointed to this council, they will serve for 2 years, their junior and senior years. And I don't know if there's any questions there. We've got some general statements about the selection process and applying. Oh, I forgot to mention, there would be 2 non-voting members who are board members to act as liaisons and support and to hear the ideas from the students in addition to the staff. And then the appointment of the SAC memberships describes the application process in general, the idea that we, as when the board is selecting those student members, that we try to get a diversity of experience and background for, as we're picking who represents. And then also the other thing, there was something else I was going to mention. There's not detailed in there right now if board members, how involved board members will be in that selection process, if there will be interviews. That could all be determined. If you want something explicit that we could put it in the board policy, or we could work through those details about the selection. One thing I'll just tell you that happens with other advisory committees, I'll use our student data privacy committees, for example. We'll have the application published and we'll receive the resumes and the nominations, and the staff person, so in this case it would be Whitney, would review all of them, and she might make some recommendations based on, oh, well, we'd like some different geographical let's pick this person from Alpine because they have this experience which nobody else has. Or so you could have the advisor, the staff person, do a first sifting with some recommendations. Or if you'd like, another idea would be to have the resumes and applications of everybody in the district of a board member be reviewed by that board member and the advisor together. Again, if you want to put some of those details in here now, we could do that, or we could leave it to later after the board policy is established, determine that selection process and as we go. So there's kind of both. I just wanted to throw that out. The other issue that has not been addressed in here, but after our discussion today, we can get it incorporated into the board policy by the September meeting, is how the students will or will not be reimbursed for either their travel or time or per diem. So one recommendation that was made to make it simple is to follow the state travel guidelines and use a similar guideline that you all use, which is if you live 50 miles away or more, that you're reimbursed for your travel and a per diem if that's needed, if they're meeting over lunch, for example, or over dinner time, or if there's some need for them to stay overnight. For example, if they're doing an orientation or training in the summer, and let's say it's an all-day training, maybe for those who live like in Cedar City or St. George, they may need to stay overnight in a hotel. So we could put in a statement that's as simple as we'll follow the same reimbursement, travel reimbursement and per diem guidelines that the board has or that the state establishes for its committees. And but I will say that there was also a mention of giving maybe a flat amount. If let's say you were to do only 2 in-person meetings a year, and then you did the rest electronically, to actually just give a flat reimbursement amount, like $100 per student or $50 per student to everybody, just to support the travel in general. So there was a discussion of that by Natalie. I reached out to Natalie and Scott to get some ideas. So if you have any questions or ideas, we'd be happy to facilitate that or put that in the board policy for our next meeting.
Okay, we'll go ahead and go to board member Brittany Cummins.
I was thinking more along the lines of reimbursement for travel expenses. It seems like it would be appropriate in per diem, but I was, these are going to be minors, and so is there any, so if there is the need for accommodating an overnight stay,
Right, what would that look
making sure that they have a parent or a chaperone or something that is also covered. There's enough per diem for whoever's accompanying the minor overnight.
Okay, board member Belknap.
Sure, I have several questions. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I think interesting on how to determine, the makeup and/or the setup. Maybe I think that could come later after we get on the move. Where is the financial coming from to back this?
I'm guessing the board's budget would cover that.
And do we have enough money in the budget?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean,
We're starting to charge for parking, maybe we can use that.
Hang on just a minute.
that.
Did you,
that-
those
I
were
d-
the
I-
two questions? Oh,
No, I still have more questions, but I just was wondering where the financials come from.
okay. Do you have an answer to that? Okay. Turn your,
Oh, I don't ever do this.
Kind.
yeah, there you
we
go.
go. It's a little different. Scott, I talked to Scott this morning, and he said he'd be happy to come and talk to you guys if you need to. He's in finance, but he said we have enough money in our board budget to handle it, and so he doesn't think that will be an issue. And so he also said, as far as the travel and per diem and all of that, he said that can be worked out. He said actually they could work that out before this comes to the full board, so they would have an idea, but he didn't think that financing would be a problem.
Okay, all right.
Okay, what were your
May
other
I
questions?
continue?
Yeah.
I think that it will be important that they create norms in this group, which would also create the norms for how to select them. Access are there 2 board members on access? So I think that might be a heavy lift to put 2 board members, or maybe you put 2 and they can exchange,
they
that
can-
they don't both attend the whole time. Just a thought. And then the staff who, is there a thought or an idea of what department that's going to be under? Has there been any thought on that?
We have. Yes.
Well, I mean, I think that's still to be determined, but Jeff Van Holten, our new policy advisor, may be a good fit for a couple of reasons. Number one, he was the mayor of Bountiful when he was a student, and he also was a leader up at University of Utah in student government when he was in college, and he could be the advisor that supports this group. I know Superintendent Dixon would like to participate, but if you have thoughts, we've talked about potentially Jeff being the advisor, so it would kind of fall under me.
Okay, and then I have a question. In here we have grades 11 and 12, and yet your verbiage was juniors and seniors.
Oh.
So my question being, I'm not
should
sure
stick
which
with
is the
one.
best way
Yeah.
Right.
to say that, so I don't care. Does
Yes.
that make sense? But I
Yes, we
think we
need to be
need to be
consistent.
consistent
Yes,
in
we'll
that.
do that, thank you.
And then, unless somebody has something else, I'd like to make a motion.
Well, we need to listen to public comment first.
Okay.
And then,
Okay,
okay. So we have comment from Kate DeGroot, if you'd like to come up. Or if you changed your mind, you can also say you changed your mind.
Say whatever you would like.
Hello, I'm Kate DeGrew. I'm a senior at Skyline High School, and so I'm the student who basically brought this idea in March to Ms. Hanson because many of my friends, I had gotten the idea from them, and I really wanted to have something like this in Utah. I love government, I love education, and I do think that having student representation and having student opinions, I think it's really valuable, and I think that's something that the board could benefit from, and that's one of the main reasons that I think we should have a student advisory council.
Thank you, Kate. And then I guess the other thing that or should we take a motion first and then?
Well, one other thing I forgot to mention, this board policy assumes a rollout of this school year. So if it's adopted by the board in September, and then we'd work it out and get it set up, so.
So do we have a timeline? Because I asked Angie to put together a timeline of what a rollout would look like. So what is the rollout for this one?
So this one's not explicit about when the
Oh, so
first
there isn't.
meeting. It just, it makes the assumption, or it states that it would happen with the 2018-19 school year. So once the board policy is adopted, because we're not sure how the application, you know, we would, do you want me
Yeah.
to hand those out? Because we would want to send out the application, give time for people to apply, then you review the resumes. I don't know if we're going to do an interview or not, an interview process. So sometimes if you do the interview process, that does take longer. You may know from Access and how that process goes. I've never personally reviewed applications and then interviewed, so I don't have a good idea about how long to expect that to take. Then you would want to announce, hopefully I would imagine we'd want to do that in conjunction with the board meeting, because the board members would select the students in a closed session, so.
Michelle, can I
So,
make a comment?
yes,
As far as timeline goes, as I've talked to the superintendent and others, I think September, if we could get this to the board and then work between now and September to get some of those details together, like what the application's going to look like, and make sure that all the financial stuff is in place. If we can get that to the board and the board approve this policy in September, Emily's ready to roll it out to the kids. She's been working on that, so she's ready to do that. I think the board would probably get the names of the applicants, we would hope, by the October meeting, and then we would be able to start.
okay. So that's one idea. The other one that I had gives us a bit more time, and the first rollout we'd roll it out, I guess, do we want to?
The 2019-20 school year.
2019-2020 school year, it just
Yeah.
gives us more time. From some of the discussion that I've had, it seems like we might need some more time to get the applicants. So anyway, that's a discussion we can have here on the board. Board member Brittany Cummins. She turned hers.
Oh, you turned it on. I think we could probably try it go for it this year, recognizing that we may not get enough applicants. And so if we don't get enough applicants, just being prepared for if it doesn't work, if we don't get the applicant numbers this year, that we say, okay, letting the kids know that as they apply, that if we have enough, then we'll go for it this year. If we don't, we'll use your name and we'll go for the next school year.
Would
just
that keep
so that
from
they
people
know.
applying?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's just being open that we want to get this going this year. We'd like to see it work. We'd like to see it happen. But if there's not enough time, just being open and transparent with those who apply, that if only 2 of you apply, it's going to be hard to get this going off the thing. But I think it'll be fine. I don't anticipate that we're not going to have anybody apply. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in it and word of mouth, and I think it'll go. We'll get enough people, and so I think it's worth a go. And I think it's letting those kids know that you're the first year, you're going to set the standard, and you're going to be part of making this work and being flexible enough to recognize things that need to be changed for the next year. So.
Are we flexible with our numbers? Like, if we say up to 15, and if we have 10 apply, could we start it with 10, still leaving the 15 open for the following year?
A viable number.
Or if there's 7,
Yeah.
like 5 or more would be a viable number.
I mean, there's no legal, if for some reason we got 13 or 12 or 14, it's not like we'd have to be like, oh, we got to cut it, we got to have 15. No, we have flexibility. This is your board policy, meaning you're the only ones who are going to police it. So it's more about giving direction to staff and setting the norms. And this could be something that we then have as an expectation for timelines moving forward for 2019-20, that this would be the expected
Right.
process. So, yeah.
Okay, board member Belknap?
Just to put in your mind, I'm just wondering if, as part of the application process, that either the local board or the local school principal has to sign off as one of, so that they are students who are engaged, who are willing to be engaged in something like this. So maybe including that.
Like a nominate.
And not necessarily a nomination. If 20 kids from one school want to apply, that either the school principal signs off on it or a local board member or something. Just keep that in the back of your head.
So it doesn't have to be a principal, but it can be like a local board member.
Yeah,
or
something. I just want you to
someone.
keep that in the back of your head. And then I think it's going to be very interesting what kinds of pieces we'll need to do in this office, either from board standpoint or from staff, because I think these kids are going to want letters of recommendations to go with their scholarship apps. And
Right.
which I think is such a positive for the young people who might want to serve here.
Okay.
Terrell, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, I was
Put
gonna,
your,
I was
Sorry,
gonna
because,
say something about that as well. Or could it be if not just an administrator, but perhaps a teacher or
I'm just
somebody?
saying, I just
Just
think put that-
someone.
Put that on the back burner as part of the application process.
It
to
could even be the
Keep the
mayor.
local area involved.
And notified too, then they would
Uh-huh,
know.
yeah, then they'll know that it's open. So Chair, did you have something else?
My
Yes.
question was just based to your signature, would be what would be the purpose of it, but I think you filled in. As long as it's open enough that
Open.
they, it doesn't have to be a principal or a board member, that it allows them to contact if it, I don't know.
Michelle, may I have a
Yeah.
discussion? I'm not sure it has to be even a leader in that area. Just somebody saying, this child wants to be engaged. It doesn't matter their academia, it doesn't matter their anything else, just they want to do it.
yeah. One of the things we discussed in the phone call is that we wanted to make sure that this was open to all the students regardless of their academic grades, because we don't know what will happen to spark an interest. And so I don't want to limit them by having to get like approval from their
Not
principal,
approval.
but
Not approval.
just a sign off from anybody in the community.
That's what I think.
Okay.
And maybe not. I'm just
Throwing it out
That's
there.
not an absolute, it's just a thought to have in the back.
Okay.
So one thing that I think would be a benefit with the signature is just so that somebody at the school knows it's going to happen and will support them in if they have to leave school early, or, somebody they can go to if they have questions about, hopefully they'll feel comfortable contacting the advisor of our committee with any questions. But let's say that, there's a math teacher who's really upset that the kid had to leave 7th period or 8th period earlier, just to have that school say, no, we know that Kate is participating, we support it, and, being in that local person to kind of,
Well, I think
Yeah,
once they're
makes sense.
appointed, hopefully they would then support them,
yeah,
we hope.
right.
for sure.
May I make
Did
a
you guys
motion?
have any thoughts on that?
I agree with maybe having someone that would confirm that this kid is like engaged and they want to participate. But I do agree that it maybe shouldn't be the principal, because we do want the diversity of students, and principals normally only know like the top 4.0 kids who are already what we would expect to be on this council, but we would want a greater diversity of students. And also, in regards to the worries about not having enough kids apply, I'm sure that every board member knows at least one kid in their district that would be interested, that they could encourage to apply.
May I
I've
make a
actually
motion?
had 3 people come and ask me when we're going to start it, so they
You
can
don't get
apply.
3,
so I think-
Linda.
I don't get 3. They're from all over. One of them's from your area.
Okay.
I make a motion?
Yes, Board Member Belknap.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion that we approve Board Policy 5008, Student Advisory Council on first reading and send it to the board on second and final read. What? It doesn't need that many readings? And send it to the full board
For approval.
for approval.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve Board Policy 5008, Student Advisory Council, and send it to the board for approval. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Our next item, 2.2, R277-510, Educator Licensing. So this is up for a repeal, and Ben. Oh, and Travis.
Yeah, Travis, if you want to come up. This rule is centered in the requirements of the old NCLB, and so I think that's the reason to repeal this. Is that correct, Travis?
Yes.
Okay, so it's just outlived its time, and so we're asking the board to repeal it.
Okay, Board Member Cummins.
I move that we repeal R277510, Educator Licensing, and forward that recommendation of repeal to the board.
Okay, so the motion before us is to repeal, my paper went, R277-510 Educator Licensing and move that recommendation to the board on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Okay, item 2.3, R277509, licensing of student teachers and interns. This one's for amendment, and this is Ben and Travis again.
So in this rule, this student teacher rule will become a thing of the past after we implement the new licensing structure. So all we've done is add to this a sunset date of July 1st, 2020. This also incorporates the RECOD updates, so that's why you may see some different statutory references. But the primary thing we're asking you to do is to add the sunset date to this rule.
Okay. I'm seeking a motion. Did you have a question? Or?
No, I'll just make the motion.
Okay, Board Member Warner.
Okay. I'm going to make a motion that we accept, it's draft one, right? Oh, wait, sorry, no, stop.
Yes. Public comment? Oh. There's.
Sorry, I got here late.
Okay.
I'm not signed up for anything. I just actually had a question. This was just a question, thank you. A question that came up in our office that we wanted to raise and see if there was any issue here. So currently, on the student teacher license, the students do not qualify for state risk management when they're teaching. And we just wondered if when you eliminate that license and now you have permanent employees, full-time employees, and interns and students all on the same license, if that would have any potential impact on the risk management issue. I don't have an answer. I mean, we're just kind of putting that out there. It's something that just had kind of come to our attention as well. So we wanted to make sure that was part of the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Yes.
I think one of the things the board should consider is that, that's actually a very good question, by the way, and I can't answer that question. But I can say that student teacher licenses did not exist when I came to the state board in 2006. These licenses were created around that time when Dr. Larry Shumway was the director of licensing. And so for all the years prior to that, there was no student teaching license whatsoever. One of the reasons it was created was to ensure that a background check had been cleared through the board prior to them starting student teaching. And so with the changes in the licensing, the assumption is that anyone that is ready to be a student teacher or an intern has met the requirements for an associate license, as was described by Sarah. So.
Okay. Any other discussion? Okay, Board Member Warner.
Okay, and I move that we amend 277509 and accept draft one, and that it has a sunset clause of 6/30/2020.
Okay, so the motion before us is to accept R2777509 on draft one with the sunset clause. And on first reading,
The sunset date is actually July 1st. June 30th would be the last date it's
okay.
effective.
So this,
The language is right there.
but we don't need to say that, right?
Yeah.
With the sunset date, okay. And send it to the board on,
Okay.
then send it to the board for approval on second and final reading. Any discussion to the motion? Okay. Yes, Board Member Cummins?
Just, The question that was asked as far as risk management, I'm guessing that will be answered prior to the board meeting. So is that information come forward with the,
Or will that be in a different rule? Yes. Dave?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yes. I've already done it. If you can follow up with risk management and come, perfect. Okay, seeing no other discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. And I noticed, yes,
Can I ask a personal privilege, Madam Chair?
yes.
Very quickly, just so you're aware, this was the easy lift I promised last time we met. And with 301 and 303 coming back in September to this committee, I expect that we will spend much more time together next month. So I look forward to that.
And then, I guess there were a few people that came in late, so
You want me to take that?
would anybody want to do public comment? We're gonna go ahead and pass that around again. Okay, so now we are on item 2.4, right? Yes. R277-708, enhancement for at-risk students. And this is an amendment, and it's Angie and Brian.
Olmsted.
Olmsted, where is? Oh, there he
Come on up,
is. He's
Brian.
clear in the back.
And I'll start giving the background on this rule and why we're bringing it forward today. This last session, there were actually 3 bills that changed the enhancement for at-risk students program, including the distribution as well as what LEAs can spend that money on. And so the changes in this new R277708 are all based on the changes in statute. The other thing to remind the committee is that we did receive $10 million of new money for this program. So it previously had about a $28 million appropriation. It now has a $38 million appropriation, which is great because the changes to statute that then now we're implementing in this board rule will require or will end up with a new distribution impacts. So without that $10 million, you could have seen some districts or charters losing money, but now with the $10 million of extra money, everybody should be held harmless, and you should see some that will receive more money. There's a seat right over here, yeah. So I'll try and just summarize some of the changes. The biggest changes, and it's kind of about 3 pages down, let's see, it's on the middle of page 3, is that now the distribution formula, we'll be looking at the number of students within the LEA that are selected or fall into the category of chronic absenteeism as well as homelessness. The homelessness definition is the same as the one we use for the McKinney-Vento federal funding. Chronic absenteeism, the definition we use for that is also tied to data that we already collect on chronic absenteeism. And you'll see the definitions are some of the biggest changes here because as we are now going to distribute money to these LEAs based on the number of students who meet this criteria, the definitions matter. So you can see the definition of chronic absenteeism. The bottom of page 1 means the number of students within the LEA who are enrolled in the LEA at least 60 calendar days or more and miss 10% or more days of instruction, whether the absence was excused or not. The other big change, policy-wise, that this rule as well as the statute made was previous to this year, if a student met 3 criteria, they were only counted once. So let's say that I'm homeless. English is my second language. I'm an English learner. And I'm also, I scored on the bottom 25% of SAGE or RISE. I would only count as one student within that district or charter. But now, for every criteria that a student meets, they can be counted up to 3 times. And so that will also change the distribution a bit. The other change, and you can see that on the bottom of page 3, it was explicitly stated that way in the statute, and we essentially, it said the board shall do this in the board rule, and so we essentially cut and paste that into our board rule, the criteria. I'm trying to think if there are any other changes of note, Brian, that you think the committee would be interested in?
I think the other one is the addressing truancy in the use of the funds.
Yes.
Those are kind of the changing the distribution and then allowing the funds to be used to address truancy.
Correct. And that's in statute. Mhm.
Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Give several questions, mostly because this was a really confusing rule to read.
Yeah.
But I have a question. So on page 3, you're just talking about the criteria to receive funding for this, and chronic absenteeism is one of them. And chronic absenteeism is defined as absent, whether it's parental excused or not. But then they can use the money for truancy. And so I'm just curious, why do we give money for one thing and then you use it for another? Because truancy and absenteeism, chronic absenteeism, are very different.
They're
I
very
can answer. Do you want to answer or you want me to?
I'll try.
Okay.
So I think the main thing is the distribution. So the distribution of the funds needs to be data points that we collect. And so we're distributing it using the chronic absenteeism was added by, I can't remember which of the bills. But so to develop the formula for distribution, to allocate the dollars. Then, as LEAs plan, the behavior that you plan to address is now truancy, as well as other factors that put students at risk of academic failure. And so I see what you're saying, but so the one issue deals with distribution, and then the second one later on is
Using funding.
the use of the funds and the different activities.
Can I supplement? Or
Yeah.
no? And we don't collect truancy data from districts, and we're not telling them what that means, because truancy could mean different things in different LEAs. The distribution formula we have to be fairly exact with, and that's where you get the number of criteria, how you count, who qualifies. And what it is the districts and charters are going to be the ones saying, we have this many students who are English learners, we have this many students who are chronic absentee, fall under that category. It doesn't impact the students. They are not labeled, or they aren't necessarily going to be placed into this program. It's data we already collect in our system that then we will use to determine their allocation of the 38 million. So if you'll remember, actually last fall, this rule was brought to Eliminating Barriers, and Eliminating Barriers made a recommendation to free up how the money is used. The statute is very prescriptive on how the money's distributed and how we calculate that. But it was open in saying an LEA can use this money to support students at risk of academic failure. And we used to state in the rule prior to November of last year that meant students who met these categories. And if you'll recall, we changed that and said it can either be to support students who are in those categories, or a board, a local board or charter school governing board, can come up with their own definition of at-risk student and their own plan to support at-risk students. So let's say that one district purely wants to focus on supporting their English learners. They feel like that's the biggest need they have. That's where they're going to get the most gains on improving academic achievement. They could do that. If another one may want to focus on their homeless, student population, another one may want to focus on increasing the academic achievement of all the students that performed in the lowest 25% on their statewide assessments. So it actually was on purpose that this rule was amended to give more flexibility to districts and charter schools to come up with a plan of how they are going to use this enhancement for at-risk student money. They do have to provide a plan to our office on how they plan to use that money, as well as have outcome data to say, we as a district chose to use English learner, to focus this on our English learners and our homeless population, because this is where we think we're going to make gains, and these are the expected outcomes. So hopefully that helps. It does seem a little weird because you have chronic absenteeism, truancy, but that's because, again, one's for distribution and one's for permission of how they can use the money.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So is there other rules or things in place that encourage schools to encourage attendance? Because this almost would say the more we have non-attendance, the more funding we get on this program, and we can use it for students who are at risk. Anyways, it seems like an odd circle, but maybe it's not enough money to really incentivize that. If it was lots, maybe it would.
Oh, he had a comment
If-
to what you
So,
said.
so we have a board rule asking every LEA to have a truancy prevention policy. And so that's where we talk about meaningful incentives for attendance. And so there's a whole separate board rule addressing truancy.
And just that, but recognizing that truancy and chronic absenteeism are different.
Two different, yes,
Yeah, and,
yes.
and that's where my concern is because it's,
Now we're counting both in.
so
Well, we don't,
parents who travel a lot or
we don't.
you know, families that
count
travel a
truancy.
lot, families that, you know, have a lot of illness in their home, et cetera. And so, which are very different, the services you provide are different. But if the money's available and the money's flexible, then, you know, it is cost extra to help support a student who is ill a lot or whatever. And so I'm just saying maybe it doesn't matter, but
Yeah.
it just seems
Yes.
odd.
I just wanted to, I don't know if this is interesting or helpful, and Brian, please correct me if I'm wrong, but there's actually data that shows that students who are absent for more than 10%, whether it's for a family vacation, for sickness, or because they're truant, because there is a difference between chronic absenteeism and truant. You can be missing school for very legitimate, you know, reasons, but that they actually, their performance does impact, I mean, their academic performance is more likely to be impacted by not being there. And so I think that's part of the reason that we collect it, but it's not trying to make a statement on whether that's good or bad. It's just when you miss school, you may need additional supports to help you get back up to speed on academic achievement, right? I mean,
So I have a question because you've lumped them into the definition of chronic absenteeism because it's missed 10% or more days of instruction, whether they are absent, whether the absence was excused or not. Is there a thing in there that's like, what if they've got straight A's and they've missed more than 10%?
So that definition of chronic absenteeism is a nationally accepted process to create that number. So it's there is no distinction between, because yes, there would be the student who's gone 30 days in a year and is straight A student, can pass every test. Maybe they were traveling Europe with their family. You know, all the things we can imagine. They would still show up in our system as chronically absent because it's a data point. It's a measurement of an absence, excused or not. And if you, in 180 days, 10% would be 18 days. And so once you've crossed that line, you would have a check mark by your name, if we were doing it that way, as you are chronically absent. And so there's no distinction between the cases we're talking about that, you know, does a chronically absent student necessarily be, you know, indicate that that student is failing or at risk of academic failure? No. But it is an indicator. It's a strong indicator. We all know that attendance is one of the most important components of, you know, whether a student is achieving academically.
I have a few more questions, if that's okay. So on line 77, I think there's a "on" missing, maybe. Funds to an LEA based on the LEA's number of students. But in that, I'm just curious, so it says the following criteria, so then it lists them 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it uses the word "and" on line 83. So is that the LEA funds are based on the LEA's number of students who meet, and is that, so the number of students who meet all of those criteria, if you use the word "and," or would it be a "and or"?
good point. Maybe it should. So it's probably in 107 through 115, I would say it's probably it should be an and, because they're using the following definitions. You know, you're using all of them, but where's the second one? Because you're right.
Oh, sorry, I'm on line 17, which leads to my next question is why do we repeat this twice in the rule? The criteria, but on line 77 through 84, it says the superintendent shall award available funds to an LEA
Yes,
based
it should be
on.
or.
Okay.
Mhm.
And then, so that is my next question is why do we repeat the criteria?
Let me remember.
The superintendent shall use data from the UTREX, so this is 107, for each LEA from the previous school year to determine an LEA's allocation of funds using the following definitions.
That's a good point. I don't know why. Actually, what it is there are two different things. One's saying they shall distribute it on this, and then it's saying use the data in UTREX. So I wonder if we could just take the first one and say,
Reference the-
distribute it based on the data in UTREX. I mean, they are stating two different things, but we probably could combine them. That's a
Yeah,
fair.
reference,
Yeah,
reference the first list and the second instance, yeah.
or just don't list, but say the superintendent shall use data from the board's UTREX system when determining the formula in subsection 1. We could amend it that way,
Okay.
and that's probably a good idea.
Like I said, it's very, and maybe it doesn't matter, it's whoever's funding it can understand the rule, it's all
Yeah,
good. But in 95 to 97, I had a question. The superintendent shall annually calculate 4% of the state appropriation of the enhancement for at-risk funding available for LEA grants to provide a base amount to LEAs. And then B, it says the superintendent shall divide the base amount described in 3A equally among all eligible LEAs. So what defines an eligible LEA?
That's a good question. Do you know?
So each,
Is if they
every
have a
LEA
plan?
in the state, I don't know why we say eligible.
Is it if they have a plan, though? Is that maybe how they're eligible? Because if they didn't submit a plan, would they be eligible?
Well, but the distribution is presented to each LEA to then write a plan. I guess if they chose not to, that would make them, but the distribution at this stage, I would say we would include every LEA. So the 4% of the allocation creates a base, and that, so column 1 is just that dollar amount spread equally to every LEA.
So that's, sorry, are you okay if I ask? So that's equally so every LEA gets $100 per se,
Right,
right? So
yeah.
it's not based on the size or student population?
Correct.
So a
It's-
school that has 5 students gets $100, a school that has 1,600 gets $100?
Yep.
Is that in statute and what's the purpose of
Where?
that
It's
base
right
amount?
here. We don't have, there's not a base formula in statute, is there? Let me look real quick. It's right here.
I don't remember that coming from statute. So a lot of our base amounts as we fund, it's kind of to establish that foundation, and then your student count builds on top of that. This also has the next one of the 20%. So that's a common, is it in statute?
No, it's not, but I'm thinking we do this like you said, it's common. For example, what if a certain school district or charter school was going to get like $50?
cents, yeah.
The idea is you want to make it meaningful enough for them to do something with it. And so we do this a lot where we have base amounts so that for our small districts and our charter schools that they get a meaningful amount. So you don't have to do it. It's actually only here in board rule. I don't see a requirement to do it in statute. It would impact our smallest districts and our charters likely.
Yeah. Because the same thing could be said at the other end, where if you have 10 students and you get $100 as your base amount, right? It's impactful. But if you have 1,600 or 4,000 students and you get $100, it's completely impactful. It has the reverse effect, right? So in the base amount, it helps the smaller schools, but using the base amount also makes that money totally irrelevant to a very large school.
Yeah.
So anyways, I don't.
And if I can add to that, the large schools distribution with 96% of the rest of the money and the majority of the kids, you're talking millions of dollars
Okay.
go to some of the LEAs as opposed to a few thousand to small. And so it
I gotcha.
it tends to work. Setting that base is a challenge to know exactly where it should be. This 4%'s been traditional. I believe this allocation was created in maybe about 10 years ago.
Okay. Sorry.
I just did the calculation quickly, it's $1.5 million. So out of 38 million, we're talking about 1.5 being distributed on this base amount.
Okay.
Okay.
So we've got some public comment on this. Huh? Do you want to ask them now, or do you want to wait till after? Okay.
Would that be okay, Jim?
Yes, let's go ahead and get your questions. Board Member Belknap.
Turn your light on.
Oh, I had another question.
I'm just kidding. Okay. I have a couple of questions. How do it's the only criteria for the LEAs to get this funding is to have a plan? Is there other criteria?
Currently, it's in the consolidated application process in the UCA. So that is the method right now that the LEA submits a UCA plan
Okay.
for
and-
their EARS funding.
Okay, and then Brian, my question, is that okay if I continue,
Yes.
Chair? Thank you. I guess my next question is it always an LEA or can a school apply separately? And once they get the money, how is it tracked that it's used for that item?
So this distribution has always been to the LEA, and then the LEA would work with its schools. The distribution from the LEAs to the schools has never been a factor of this office in whether that is equal or somehow distributed, proportionally, or that's not been part of our review ever.
Okay.
What was the last part of your
No,
question?
that was
That was
got it.
okay.
Okay, and then I would ask here, because Brittany's brought up several times the difference between chronic absenteeism and truancy, like 27, 28, 29. What are it looks like to me there's 4 pieces that are your data points. Are there more than that? Chronic absenteeism, been in there for more 60 days, 10% instruction, homelessness. Are there other pieces that are your data points?
So student performance on
Oh, on the test, yeah,
the
that's right.
test,
Sorry.
and then did you say poverty?
I did not.
Poverty is one as
Oh,
well.
it's just 100 miles down there in this easy-to-read
Yeah.
world. Okay, it's okay. That might be helpful to put all the criteria in one spot. And then I have another question. Truancy, is truancy not a student being absent 10 days in a row without an excuse?
I
we have-
believe that is habitually truant.
Okay. And so I can't draw my line either, because if a student's not 10 days in a row without an excused absence, then that's truant, but that's also chronic absenteeism.
No, chronic absenteeism is 10%. So in a
Okay.
typical
Just-
school year, that'd be 18.
Oh, good, I'm gonna miss school then. Okay, and my question being on all of these, is the criteria consistent across all LEAs? There's no vacillation on how they would calculate this? Or shouldn't be?
That's a great question. I think as we pull this information from UTREX, recognizing that every LEA within their own SIS, right, is submitting this
Right.
information. Like, for instance, the English learner you know, that's a indicator, a flag that's being addressed in each of those students' file, right, their electronic file. So
That's pretty consistent,
yeah, it's
All right.
consistent
how it should
in
be reported.
definition. Is it consistent in practice?
Not necessarily, if it's consistent in definition, that's all right.
Yeah, and so I think yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Line 116 and 117, it says the superintendent shall allocate funds appropriated for at-risk factors to each LEA based on the LEA's portion of at-risk factors in comparison to the statewide total. Do you mind explaining that, what that means to me? Sorry.
We may need to call Natalie or Jamie in
Oh,
for a
okay,
lifeline.
sorry.
Yeah.
Do you want me to text?
So it's not a, like, here's the students who qualify, here's your number of
That's-
students, we're gonna
that's-
divide it up?
Well,
But what is that?
that's probably one that when we were, we probably missed that in now needing to include everybody 3 times, or up to 3 times.
3 times.
Well, I don't see why.
Because,
Sorry, but I'm not the expert.
yeah, I don't see that this would be relevant in our new calculation, right? Or am I missing, because based on the LEA's, that's probably just portion, right? Not
So is Natalie coming
Civil went to find
So
to, okay,
can I tell you what I think it means? I'm kind of going back to my tax days when I used to do formula drafting all the time. So what it essentially means, this is saying you, again, essentially get a proportion. If you have 1,000 students who meet the criteria and there's 1 million statewide, your allocation is based on the number that you have in comparison to the statewide total. So it's essentially saying, and maybe I should use 1,000 and 100,000 because I can do that quickly, percentage-wise. That means you get 1%. If you have 1,000 students and statewide there's 100,000 students, then you're going to get 1% of that 38 million minus the 1.5 million. I think that's what it's saying, but.
okay.
But why would we need to say that? Because the formula would just distribute it.
Well, that is
That's-
you have to remember, this is the formula right here. So what they're saying is, it's based on the students who meet these criteria, and that you can count them many times, 3 times. So let's say that previously, LEA had 800, they really only have 800 students, but because they have multiple criteria, they're actually going to be counted as 1,000 now. But then we're going to do that statewide, so previously maybe it was 800,000 and now it's 1 million. This is now saying it's proportional, so this is actually part of the formula. Part of it is counting the numbers, so that's what you're saying when you're saying use the data, and it'll be based on the number of students and multiple criteria, and then we're saying, and your portion will be proportionate to the number of students you have compared to the statewide. Yes, it's a formula, this is formulaic language, and
Okay.
that's why,
Well, no wonder I can't get it.
Okay.
and you have attorneys who are not finance people drafting it, so it's not always perfect, but we try to get there.
So now we'll move, while we're waiting for Natalie, we'll move to public comment, which is Sarah Jones. Did you still wish to comment?
Thank you. Sarah Jones with UEA. This is actually kind of looking forward, or encouraging the board to look forward on this. We supported the increase in funding on this. This is such an important program. So the additional $10 million is amazing. And now being able to count for 3 criteria, we support that as well. But what we've been thinking about is, has an analysis been done by the board as you're preparing to do your budget priorities for this coming year and years future about the difference, the impact to funding if 4 criteria were allowed? What is the shortfall that we really need for this at-risk money? It's fantastic that we have $38 million now. We have additional monies. how many children would be impacted positively if 4 criteria were allowed and we had the sufficient funding to do that. So we would just encourage you, we understand the practicalities. You're dealing with statute right here and what the statute was, but as you work on your budget priorities, is there still a need in this at-risk funding, and what would be the difference between 3 criteria and children meeting 4 criteria or 5 criteria? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Okay.
So now
Jamie's here.
Natalie.
No, Jamie.
Jamie, okay. I'll turn the time over to you. Do
Me
you
to
want,
just
yeah,
give her
let's.
the background, or do you want to give the background?
Do we want to talk about the 4% base, or was that? Okay,
I can describe the question.
okay.
It
Okay.
was 116,
So,
117.
yes, so if you'll look, Jamie, at lines 116, 17, they're right up here. And I took my best stab at being a financial genius like Jamie and Natalie and Scott, right? But the language essentially says the superintendent shall allocate funds appropriated for at-risk factors to each LEA based on the LEA's proportion of at-risk students in comparison to the statewide total. So I stated if an LEA has 1,000 students or factors, and there's 100,000 statewide, that means they would get 1%. So this is describing the proportion they'll get of the money. Is that correct?
Sorry, okay. Yeah, Jamie Barrett, Minimum School Program Administrator. That is correct. So after we take the 4% and the 20% for poverty, the remaining pot of money gets divvied out based on risk factors up to 3. So before, it didn't matter how many risk factors a student had, a student counted for 1 regardless. Now, with this change in the statute, if the student possesses or has those 3, up to 3 risk factors, they will count 3 times in the formula. Therefore, when any LEA that has a high population of students that have those risk factors, they should be receiving additional dollars because it's increasing the count for that LEA.
Okay, and I just want to clarify, because this is really hard to understand. The at-risk factors would be chronic absenteeism, okay, and homelessness,
They're right here, yeah. Subsection
limited English proficiency. Do we have them all?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So-
So those are all of them. So those that are chronically absent, basically 10% or more, whether it's excused or not, that's one at-risk factor, right?
Correct.
And then we'll have, okay.
Correct. So each of those counts. So if a student has any up to 3 of those, they will count 3 times within the formula.
Okay. But if a student only has one
Then-
and then none of the others,
Correct.
then they count, okay.
Correct.
Can I mention?
Yeah.
Just as a reminder, the definition section is meant to define the terms, but it's not meant to be the list of the distribution.
Okay.
So the distribution is based on subsection 1 right there. So it's essentially the superintendent shall award available funds to LEAs based on the number of students who meet this criteria. And then when counting, they count students, they can count them up to 3 times. So subsection 1 is the core of the distribution, and then the subsections that follow. I would say this section, section 3, is essentially the distribution formula because it talks about the base, it talks about the proportional, to the statewide numbers. So hopefully that's helpful, because I know I've noticed sometimes we're looking at the definitions and then we're looking at different places. It is a little confusing, but just as a reminder, the definitions are merely there to
Right.
to kind of state how do we count poverty, or what's the definition of, homelessness. But the formula itself is based on this core. So, and I did make some changes to the draft based on the comments. If somebody wanted to make a motion, I could hand this to them and they could make the motion if you want to do it that way. Or you could say, if you're ready to pass it out, we could bring it back next month if needed. But if you're ready to pass it out, I can make these changes. You could just direct me to make the changes and have it ready for draft 2 also next month. Have you done, I apologize, may I ask a question?
Yes, go
I'm
ahead.
so sorry. Have you all done this distribution yet? Okay, so is this essentially now codifying what did we already distribute the money to the LEAs for this year?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because of the Lincoln Fillmore bill passed and this
Yes.
changed
Right.
the formula.
Okay. Now, in the bill, do they define chronic absenteeism? I'm just having a
we
hard
do.
time with that definition.
don't
I know
think
it's the
they
national definition. I don't really agree with the national definition.
So, can I?
But I'm still trying to wrap my brain around how that works, so.
So the bill requires it to be based on chronic absenteeism, and then
Okay.
we have to define chronic absenteeism. But we already use, the data we collect, it is defined for this year, so it's already been done, it sounds like. But if for future years, we wanted to define chronic absenteeism differently, it will require different data to be collected. So I guess what I'm
Okay.
trying to, I know it's kind of like weird, but we do this based on past year data. There's no way we could change it at this point. I mean,
Right.
we only have the last year's data. It is this definition. If moving forward, we wanted to change something, have the data be not based on excused absences, for example, we then need to start collect the data, which we'd announce in April, which really means we'd start collecting the data the next year. So the first time we could meaningfully change the definition of chronic absenteeism, it will take us about 18 months. Is that correct? Or am I incorrect in what I'm stating?
The formula is the calculation's prepared as soon as legislative session ends, so it's about March of every year.
But isn't it based
So
on
it's
last
based
year's
on
data?
prior year,
Yeah.
right? So some of it's taken at year end and some of it's taken at the
Okay.
October 1st count.
Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins?
Could you just remind me, Lincoln Fillmore's bill,
Senate Bill 145.
Yes.
and it was
Is
the
that it, right?
property tax and all that?
This was, yes, that original bill had everything in it, and then as soon as House Bill 293 passed, he reduced his bill and modified it and just included the enhancement for at-risk portion only, which changed the risk factors to add homelessness and chronic absenteeism.
Okay, and so that's how this affects, okay.
Yeah. I think the bill is attached to the board docs.
No. Can I?
Oh, wait, this is different.
So
Yeah.
actually, that section of code that's attached to board docs has all of the changes from the three bills. So like one bill added that it can be used for truancy, and that was Representative Snow's bill. So essentially the language anyway, there's certain parts that were impacted, but the end result is this section of code, which is 53F-2-410. Senator Fillmore's bill added in subsection 2, chronic absenteeism and homelessness. And then was it SB2 that did the individual criteria, or was it vice versa? There are three different bills.
SB 2, right, added the 3 count,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, any other? So any other discussion or a motion or anything? Okay, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
I move that we approve R 277708 draft,
It'll be two, won't it?
draft 1 with the amendments, and recommend that the board approve draft 2 on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve draft 1 as amended and move on first reading, move to the board for second and final reading. Okay, any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed. And we're now on item 2.6. R 2771-106, Utah Professional Practices Advisory Commission Appointment Process.
May I just
Yes.
say something? I apologize. One thing that I thought you might be interested in knowing, when we were working with Senator Fillmore and others on that chronic absentee language, they asked us what our definition, our data point was on that. So when we told them what we were collecting and that it would be based on that because it is a prior year collection. So although they didn't define it in statute, Senator Fillmore knew how we currently define it and was okay with that data collection and how it was defined. And I apologize, I didn't say that earlier, but hopefully that's helpful. So
Now we're on 2.6. It looks like we struck out 2.5.
yes.
Okay. So we've got Ben, and then, hello.
Santa.
Yes. Go ahead, Board Member Stokes.
So after last month's board meeting where we were just having the discussion regarding UPAC members, you know, in an effort to continue to try to create a separation between what the board does and what UPAC does, it seemed to me that in the olden days, as
2 years ago.
2 years ago, the olden days, the superintendent used to appoint the UPAC committee. And that's a committee of professionals who review as you all know, I mean, but for everybody else that reviews the disciplinary actions of school teachers. And I believe there ought to be a separation between the board and the UPAC committee. So I said to Ben, what would that look like? And so Ben prepared, I don't know who else did, I don't know who else worked on this, but Ben prepared this change in the rule. So it's pretty self-explanatory. I mean, it's kind of taking this idea that we have a separation between UPAC and us, and we should be able, the board should be able to make determinations without tainting what UPAC is an independent organization that gives us back recommendations, and there should be a separation. And I think the minute we drop ourselves into that, then it creates, in my mind, a conflict. So that's what this looks like.
If I can add one thing, Chair.
Yes.
Just to add to that, the statute on UPAC does anticipate that the superintendent will make the appointments to UPAC. A couple of years ago, the board added the provision that we should bring all the applications to the board as well. But the statute, as written, calls for the superintendent to make those appointments.
Okay. Yes, Board Member Belknap?
So just for clarity, so that I have it in my head correctly, the separation is that we're not appointing UPAC members any longer, or, and that's the piece that's the separation.
Yeah, the statute, as has been pointed out, says that the superintendent will make the appointments to UPAC.
You don't currently make the appointments. What we do is
Right.
you advise the superintendent after reviewing all the applications.
Right, so, okay.
And if we're
Right.
not happy with the superintendent, you know, then we get rid of the superintendent, right? That's what our control is.
So I'm reading in the statute, and so we would adopt the rules establishing. So the board would adopt the rules establishing the appointment, and then the superintendent would appoint. That's how it's stated in the statute. Okay.
You want to talk?
I was going to make the motion.
Okay, you can.
Well, I was going to, she has to ask if there's any public comment.
There isn't. Nobody has signed up.
Great, come in.
Oh, wait. Yes, there is. I didn't turn my page. Rita?
Hi, Rita Higren with AFT Utah. A couple questions. One was in the education, the education group who does it. I'm so sorry. I've been out 4 months dealing with 2 knee replacements, so it's trying to get my head back in. Oh yeah, that was me running. Yeah. Okay, the selection process, UPAC, and line 70, education organization member appointments. Am I reading this as a very legalese way to say something like PTA?
They come from the PTA.
Yes, okay. So that's the PTA portion. And then there was another thing, it said that you'd serve for 3 years and until you have an appointment, someone else appointed to take over your place. So there's an "and" in there.
What line is
I'm
that?
trying to find where that was. Filling of vacancies, or how long they serve.
68 through 69 talks about midterm vacancies.
I'll look that up, but I'll let you know what that was. But I think there was a word in there was like you get, when you're appointed, you serve for 3 years, and until you have a replacement. So I'll find that exact spot and let you know.
The UPEC terms are established in the statute.
Okay.
They can serve up to 2 3-year terms.
Yes. And then it says, and until you get an appointment. So if I wanted to serve 1 3-year term, I can't quit until I have someone to replace me?
Well,
I think that's a little ambiguous. So.
That's not part of this, though.
Yeah, it may not be in here. I may have read it somewhere else. I'm just trying to get up to speed again. But as I find that, I'll let you know so you can deal with it moving forward. Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sorry for sounding like an idiot.
Yeah. I'm not seeing it in here, but we'll look for it. Yeah.
I didn't see a number.
I was reading the things real quickly.
Okay, Board Member Warner.
I'd like to make a motion that we approve R277-106 Draft 1 Stokes Amendment on first reading and send it to the board for further discussion and approval.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve R277-106 on first reading and send to the board for second and final reading. Okay. Any discussion to that motion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. You won this one, Spencer. Yes.
And just to clarify, that "and" language is actually in statute and not in board rule. So the question is
So
whether.
we need to change it in statute, basically, or.
Or see if it's really an issue. I don't know. Hopefully there's been appointment. Ben, have you ever seen that happen where somebody has had a 3-year appointment and then they've had to stay beyond with,
no, because we take applications at a fixed time every year so that we'll have an orderly process to make that transition.
Okay, perfect. Okay, next item, 2.7, R277-487, Public School Data Confidentiality and Disclosure. This is Ben and Whitney.
I'll let you take the lead on this one.
Okay, Whitney Phillips, Chief Privacy Officer. Are there any questions about the proposed changes? Do you want me to, oh, you have them up, thanks. What's that?
Maybe give some background.
Sure. Because of the last legislative session, there were some items that we needed to include in board rule. That includes defining what a significant data breach is. You can go down to that proposed definition. Let's see. Significant. This has been reviewed by our Student Data Privacy User Group and our advisory group. It is difficult to define what significant means, and I think that's why our legislature asked us to define it and didn't define it in statute. Are there any questions on this? If I can explain it, it essentially is quantity and sensitivity. So if there's a large quantity of data, regardless of its sensitivity, we want to hear about that, and we're asking that each LEA define what that would be. We're just saying kind of a large number here. And then sensitive would be, our instruction would be students that are on IEPs, 504s, any kind of more sensitive information that could get out. That's typically sensitive.
What about addresses or?
Well, addresses, it depends. If you've opted out of directory information, then absolutely that would be sensitive, especially for some parents.
So like academic records, more sensitive academic record. Okay, sure.
The other part that we added that was a pretty major change was the requirement for the IT security plan. The Student Data Protection Act does not state anything about having, requiring LEAs to have an IT security plan. However, they asked the board to make rules to improve industry best practices. And it's industry best practice to have an IT security plan. Last year we had, if you scroll up, you can see the definition of an IT security plan in the definition section. Sorry, Angie. Here it is, right there, number 11. And we use the NIST 800 for this and discovered over the past year that this was a little bit of an overkill. This is about an 800-page document describing all of these different controls. It was overkill for almost all of the LEAs, and instead, after talking to multiple stakeholders, including many discussions with UETN, they recommend that we go to the Center for Security Controls. And I'm not a security expert, but I can tell you that they're much more easily understood. And they also provide an order. It used to be called SANS 20, an order of importance from 1 to 20. And so what we're anticipating is we're going to be able to measure compliance better because we have these 1 through 20. So we'll know if your LEA has all 20 done or if they're working on the first 2, but at least that provides a roadmap for our LEAs.
Yes, Board Member Brittany Cummins.
Going back to the definition of significant data breach, sorry, I lost it.
Line 93.
Thank you. So you're saying that if a large number, which is interesting because, if you've got going back to small versus large LEAs, right? So if you've got a small charter school that has a couple hundred students and they accidentally have a problem with 500 students, right? And that's like 90%, 95% of their student population. Is that significant rather than a school that has 4,000 students and only loses the same number, but it's 2% of their student population? And so I guess I'm just curious what you mean by large number of student records are compromised. Is it a percentage? Is it?
I think you're exactly right that providing a definition is not a one-size-fits-all when it comes to this. And we thought about including percentages. Is it 40%, 50%? Where is your kind of threshold for acceptability for a data breach? And what we are asking is that each LEA develop a policy within their data governance plan and that we are able to review that instead of having a prescribed amount, because I think it also depends if 90% of the students, if something very not sensitive got out versus a lot of data on just a classroom, it's hard to kind of balance that, but I'm open to recommendations on this definition.
Okay. Well, that's a hard definition.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up
Yes.
question? So then again, on 167, which is related, so it's basically saying, so when you have this occur, a significant data breach occurs of student data, either by the LEA or third parties, the superintendent shall within 10 business days, by third parties to the superintendent. Okay, sorry, I missed the superintendent. I was like, who does the report go to? So they report to the superintendent, the data breach. So here, the state superintendent. Thank you, answered my own question. But I guess the question, I'm still curious as to what, it just feels like, so when you're saying sensitive data, it's, you know, if they're on an IEP, et cetera, but some people might feel like their students' test scores are sensitive or
Yeah.
whatever, and so it just feels real, their name, their address, their phone number, like, and you talked about directory stuff, their birth date, you know, gender, et cetera. Do you know what I mean? And so I'm just curious why we say that, you know, you can lose a lot of this data and I only have to report to the superintendent. Does the parent know? Is there any requirement that you notify the parent if that data has been released somewhere?
So if it's a large data breach or if it's a sensitive one, the superintendent needs to be informed within 10 days. And you're absolutely right, though. What is private to one person might not be to another person. I mean, look at Facebook. Sometimes people post a lot, and sometimes they don't post at all. So I guess one of the LEA's concern was having to report ones that were very, very small. And so we wanted to have that large. For example, a data breach would include a student walking by and seeing a test score, and so that would be probably thousands of occurrences. So we wanted to make this somewhat reasonable, but yeah. What was your other question?
Well, are you okay?
Notification, yeah.
So I guess the question is there's a difference between a student walking by and seeing someone's test score, because when you know the audience, right? So it's just an accidental whatever. But what if it's breached in some other manner? It's nefarious in some way, right? But it's only a small amount. There's some kind of a hacking that takes place, and only a few names are taken, or a few files are accessed, et cetera. But there could be dangerous ramifications because that data is now, or that information has now been accessed by somebody else, right? Whereas a student walking by, that was accident, nothing nefarious, nothing, there's not going to really be any side effects to that particular thing. But there could be a small occurrence and now somebody, just one or two students are affected, and we know about it. Should those parents be notified to watch out for, to look for, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. FERPA requires that if personally identifiable information is released, if there's an unauthorized release, that be noted within the education record. It doesn't necessarily say that the parent needs to be notified of that, although the parent has access to the education record, and that's for unauthorized disclosures. And to your other point, 95%, approximately 95% of data breaches are human error. That's why we do so much training. That 5%, though, I think you bring up a good point, if it's nefarious and if it's intentional. And so one suggested change to this could be if an intentional intrusion were noted, would we want to know about that? Would we could add that to the list of the definition for significant data breach if it's an intentional intrusion.
Is there a way to add that parents must be notified? I mean,
Chair?
regardless of
Chair, if I may.
how important. Yeah.
There's already a law and statute that asks for parent notification if there is a student breach. I had Representative John Notwell draft it and it passed. And I believe it was 2015 or 2014 that it did.
So if there's a law,
So there
then
is a law
you're
already in
right.
statute.
Should put it in here.
You're right. I misspoke on that. FERPA doesn't require the notification, but the Student Data Protection Act, now that I remember, does require the notification to parents of an unauthorized data breach. And so you're absolutely right, Lisa. Board Member Cummings.
So then, could we put that in the rule?
I think
Or
that.
reference it.
Go ahead.
Or reference that law at least in the rule? That a notification to parents must be done and then reference? Actually, I move that we add a reference to that section in code requiring a notification to parents. So that's the motion before us. Any discussion to that motion? Yes.
So we generally try not to just repeat what is in code, so the legal requirement is right here in 53E-9-304, but maybe we could flag, say, as described in
Right.
law, you know,
A note-
53E9.
I don't know what the wording
something,
could be, but something like that.
Yeah. Is it, Ben, can you see a spot in there where it might fit well? Okay, just, it's probably somewhere in the rule around here, actually. An LEA shall report all significant data breaches of student data either by the LEA or third parties to the superintendent. So this talks about them
Right.
reporting it to us. But the parental, and maybe this might be the best way to do it. Ben, can you just be ready to say, in addition to notifying parents and as described in section 53E-6, oh, no,
I believe
not
it's
that one. Or, sorry.
53E-9-304.
Yes, I had it. There it is. Sorry, I pulled up the superintendent UPAC nomination section. It's not 304 right here?
Yeah, it's 304. Yeah.
Okay,
304,
so
section
just
2.
say, in addition to notifying parents as required in 53E-9-304, comma, then we say the LEA, an LEA shall report all significant data breaches, you know, and then go on. Does that work?
Yeah.
Yeah, if I may, Chair.
Hold on.
Add something.
Board
to the
member
motion.
Brittany Cummins, and then,
And so if that's where we put it and the wording that we use, which I think is a great place, I would like to add to the definition of a significant data breach that there's anything that was intentional or, I don't know how you define that, but something that's known to the LEA that says, we know somebody deliberately accessed this information, even though it's infiltration is a good.
even if it's just one student or
So
two.
so
no.
that you know that that happened and it was intentional, because then I mean, accidental things, they kind of fly away and
Right.
nothing happens. But when there's intention to it, you know that somebody has intent to do something, and if people know about it.
Can I
Okay,
speak?
and then board member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. Whitney, if you could tell me, is 10 days the standard of notification? In my head, it's 72 hours, but is 10 days standard?
10 days is fairly standard. That's why we selected it. It gives the LEA a little bit of time to do run an investigation, to conduct an investigation, because oftentimes more information is discovered over time, and so we wanted to allow for that discovery. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion? Yes.
So I wanted to make a little bit of a distinction. Because I think that's getting somewhat convoluted, there's a requirement in here to report a significant data breach to the state superintendent. And that is based on that definition of being large, sensitive, and then with the inclusion of being malignant, somehow an intrusion, a successful attack. And then there's the notification in the Student Data Protection Act that requires notification of the parent. It does not it doesn't say that the data must be sensitive or a significant data breach. It could just be it's just an unauthorized disclosure. And so I just want to make sure we understand that difference, because if we added that definition to the notification of parents, parents would be notified far less often than what the Student Data Protection Act, I believe, intends.
Right. Oh, yeah. I should mention that. Yes, there's one other section that I think you would be interested in reviewing that Ben reminded me of. The Student Data Protection Act requires that the board make rules on the Utah
Registry of Autism Disorder. It's called. Thank you. Autism Development and Disabilities. I don't have a copy. Let me.
Starts at line 350.
Thanks. Pull this up. The Student Data Protection Act requires, it says that we shall provide PII to the Utah Registry of Autism Developmental Disabilities, and so that's included in here.
So code is forcing us to give PII to this registry against a parent's will if they do not want that on there? Basically, is that what's changed?
It does require an agreement and a disclosure of PII, but what is required, what we can do is have a say in the agreement, how and prescribe how the data are used, how they're maintained, how they are destroyed. But essentially, yes, it requires the disclosure of PII.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Board Member
just
Lisa Conlon.
elaborate a little bit on that. Senator Andreg reinstated that last session, feeling that it was needed. And so that's why when he drafted the revisions for the student data privacy, he put
understand.
that in.
But still, parents. Okay. Board Member Cummins.
So I was just noodling on her comment of kind of conflating the law and this rule. And so I'm wondering if the amendments aren't necessary, because if the act, I have numbers and names get muddled up, but if the act that you're talking about says that parents will be notified of any unauthorized disclosure of information, then that would
Yeah.
cover anything that's in this rule.
Yeah.
And then, and so any of the amendments that we've been talking about wouldn't be necessary, is that correct?
Yeah. So I guess we'd have to just vote that motion down to that amendment. Yeah.
I think to answer your question, legally, they aren't necessary, correct? We do not need to restate it. The rule is meant to be a supplement, or to essentially for the board to supplement statute with whatever the legislature has directed you to do, or if you find that there's something that is unanswered or needs clarification, that's essentially what the rule is. So to answer your question, legally, we don't need to do it, but if we wanted to make it clear to help people remember that in addition, you already have these recommendations or these requirements in code that you notify parents, this is just stating that in addition to that, you also notify the state, USBE.
Okay.
It's fine, I mean, I think it's okay.
Okay. Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins.
So is there a place in this, I mean, because I'm guessing this isn't the only rule that talks about student data, or is it? Is this the only rule that just governs student data in the state board?
There is, I'm not terribly familiar, but there are rules with data collection requirements, and when those, like enrollment counts are due October 1st, that's more about collection rather than privacy.
So as far as protecting student data from the school educational perspective, this is the board's rule that covers that. Would it be helpful just to create a reference, so this is supplemental to whatever law, so it's just overarching and we're not trying to confuse any definitions where we put it and how we put it?
Yes.
So the purpose statement at the very beginning of the rule does signal those other sections of code. The purpose is to, anyway, but that's a good question. Part of the other thing to remember is that as part of Whitney's job, and actually the code requires our Chief Privacy Officer and her staff to essentially provide training and supports and manuals. And so the rule and statute are the law, But then when you talk about how do you help LEAs understand now what to do with that and make it user-friendly or do supports, that's what essentially like the guidance documents, manuals, resources, and training are. And this is one instance where actually the statute explicitly requires you to not only have a chief privacy officer, but to have 2 other staff, which are David and Greg, to to train. So this is a place where we are explicitly by law required to provide that support and professional development. Because I think at the time that this was such a big change, the legislature recognized that just providing legal standards wasn't enough. And so I guess mostly what I'm trying to say is that as we establish the law here, you don't always have this with all of the code. In fact, it's very rare to have the resources here at USBE where now Whitney and her staff can provide the training and resources and help LEAs with this support.
So, remember, did you have anything else? Okay. I guess now I'm seeking a motion. Oh, did you want to come up and make public comments? Sorry. I think it's just that speak.
So I appreciate the board looking at these issues and know they're important.
Can you state your name?
Mark Clement, Alpine School District and USBA. I appreciate a couple of changes that were made. It was onerous to have every employee have to report that they had training every year. There is still kind of an unfunded, you have to provide training thing. The one thing that was added that I'm a little bit concerned about is the need for a IT security audit and to certify that you've done that. Just briefly looking at it, it's somewhere around $20,000, which over the state would be about $800,000, which could be, I guess I think that LEAs are really concerned about this and that it's really their responsibility. And as you start putting in more and more onerous things, it might be helpful to some people but harmful to others. And so I would just caution against doing that without really knowing that there's going to be a tangible benefit from putting in that expensive requirement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Board member Brittany Cummins, yes.
So is line 180, is that something we've added or is that based on statute?
Line 180 and 181 is not based on the Student Data Protection Act, other than the fact that the Student Data Protection Act requires the board to make rules to ensure reasonable best practices. Through meetings with UETN, they estimated a $5,000 cost that they could perform an audit. And so that would be $5,000 once every 3 years. With a lesser cost for the smaller LEAs. It might not be, we've heard from a few folks that they are a bit concerned with the cost as well. But I think that this is a pretty reasonable best practice that our user group supports.
Chair?
Yes.
Whitney, did we loosen up the training?
No, let me clarify that the Student Privacy Act, which is not the Student Data Protection Act, the Student Privacy Act passed in 2016 still stands. Every employee still must be trained and they must have it's certified in writing and given to their local boards that they have been trained. So I don't see any change there.
Okay.
But
So it's in code.
it's in statute 53E-9-204, I believe.
Okay, yeah. So- Okay, any other discussion? Okay, so we have a motion before us to amend the rule and adding,
And can you read the language
yeah.
I said?
Yes, that is on. So on line 167, it would read, in addition to notifying parents as described in 53E 9304, an LEA shall report, and then as previously stated.
Okay,
And there was the definition, I don't know if we wrote some language for the definition. Remember, Board Member Cummins requested.
and then there was another definition of, I think she wanted to add, Intentional.
Yeah, so maybe could you direct us maybe to work on that definition?
Yeah.
Because do we have language we could just?
I would say that an intentional, successful data breach, a data attack. But I would give me a little bit.
Okay.
I'll bring that back.
We'll get it into draft two.
so we need to vote on the amendment to that, and then, yes, Board
So
Member
I'd like
Brady.
to amend that amendment to only change the definition portion of it and not to add the parental notification to
Okay.
that other line.
So the amendment to the amendment is to just add the definition change and to strike out the parental notification change. Okay. Any discussion to that motion? Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? No? Okay, so motion passed unanimously. You're looking at me inquisitively. This is why I like the fact that the parental notification is still referenced. I don't believe that it will limit them because it still is referencing the Student Data Protection Act so that they know any of these, not just limited to that. So that's the only reason. Okay, so
It was 4-1 though.
it was
You said
4-1, so it
unanimous.
passed.
Yeah.
Not unanimously,
Yeah.
but it passed. Okay, so now we vote on the amended, which is
So,
to include the definition.
right, so the motion would be to pass draft 1 with amendments and stuff that we work on, and then
Right.
recommend the board adopt draft 2 on second and final reading.
Okay, so the motion before us is to adopt R277-487, draft 1 with amendments, and send to the board on second and final reading. On second reading, do we want
So we
final?
would approve it on the draft 1 with amendments on first reading.
Approve
and
it,
recommend
draft
that the
1 with
board
amendments. First
adopt-
reading.
Sorry.
It gets hard when you're doing first, second, third readings.
And recommend that the board.
And recommend that the board adopt it on second and final reading.
Yeah.
Okay. I hope you got that.
Or-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, there wasn't. So I just made it.
yeah.
Okay, so any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Okay, so item 2.8, this is an information item. It's the 2017-18 annual report for student data privacy. And Whitney, you're on deck again.
Okay, our board rule, R277487, requires that the chief privacy officer submit an annual report. And this is the first of its kind, and I'm looking for any feedback. There's, you can read there what the board rule requires, and what we've been up to. And towards the end, it does ask for recommendations for further improvement. That's on page 12. And that's our suggestion for where to move forward in this next year. I guess I don't have a big presentation on this, but I'm open to questions. I don't know how much time you want me to spend on this. Yes, Angie?
I was going to say, if you wanted to provide background and highlights of things that have gone well this year, and then maybe describe the recommendations for moving forward, and maybe take, I don't know, 3 minutes to, or 4.
Yeah,
Sure.
Kind of summarizing.
So you can see on page 9 here what we've been up to. And I have a background in measurement and evaluation, and so our team, we really want to make sure that what we're doing is actually having an impact and that we monitor that impact both on us and in LEAs. So you can see here on table 1, sorry, they're a little different. If you look at table 1 here, these are some of the deliverables that we've provided. You're somewhat familiar with training videos. We just completed our last one for an educator relicensure course. We have done many in-person trainings and online trainings. I think we're very customer service focused. And so if an LEA wants us to come and provide training or help them, we say yes every time that we can. We also have provided model documents. The Student Data Protection Act requires that we provide some model documents. We've provided more than what is required. One exciting item under the resources in the guidance documents is this LEA Guidebook. It says summer of 2018. It is done. We had one typo this morning, and now it's done. So we're excited to get that out to the LEAs. We tried to make it short. It is a 80-page document with different sections and resources for the LEA data manager. And then if you scroll down more, we wanted to look at compliance metrics across the state. And you can see we have, one item that is 100% of what was required, and some are not quite there. But this is our baseline data. And so we're able to see after this year the impact we've had, and next year hopefully move some of these numbers up, and there's been a few additional requirements as well. If we scroll down, I think if we go to the recommendations for further improvement, so keep going. You can read this as well, but I want to get to the meat of it. Here we are. There's a few things that we want to focus on for this next year. The first thing is practicing data minimization, and what that means is if you're holding on and maintaining less data, you're less of a target. There's less gold in the castle, so you're not attractive to hackers, or if things are unintentional as well. So we want to focus on that. We want to look at having privacy impact assessments and developing assessments so that the team and I can go out and actually perform those at no cost. Also, you can see managing third-party risk. We have made some progress in that this year, where our data sharing agreements and our contracts have many more restrictive provisions in them. This year we want to do even more. We want to have an automated letter that goes out asking third-party vendors to certify that they have destroyed their data. I think that sometimes these third parties, the smaller ones, might not be destroying their data. We're not sure, but it's a reminder to them that that is required. We're working hard on this statewide educational application vetting. This is one issue where our LEAs do not want local control. They do not want to do it themselves. They would be more than happy to have the state help them. And what this essentially is looking at different software, such as Canvas, Kahoot, Classroom Dojo, and having the state help with vetting the products for their privacy policies. And so we're working on that. we'll essentially have a list of vendors that have been approved and a list that have not been. And then lastly, we can talk about with our records manager, Ben, is a focus on record retention scheduled updates and training. This has been a complicated beginning. I didn't anticipate our records retention schedule to be so behind. Let me stop because I didn't know what a record retention schedule was when I first started. But it's essentially, what do you do with data? How long do you hold on to it? And what are you supposed to do with it after a period of time? Are you supposed to destroy it? Are you supposed to keep it forever, for 10 years, for 1 or 2 years? The State Archives has a number of schedules that were updated in the 90s well, some of them in the 2000s, but with the intention that this is a record right here, and that that records have changed now, and it's digital, and there are pieces, and there are warehouses of data. And so we're working with State Archives on updating that, and we've been working with Ben on updating those schedules, and then provide training. So that's a big initiative for this next year.
Okay. I just wanted to ask, is this full document on board docs, or?
The whole document is on board docs, except for this is prettier and not ADA compliant.
Okay, that would be why
Yes. All
Okay.
the words are there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any discussion or questions that we have for Whitney?
Chair, if I
I'm
may.
looking at you and thinking, yes, Board Member Lisa.
I want to thank Whitney Phillips and her team. I think I've been privy to many of these discussions and meetings. I've seen great growth in security and data, and I'm excited about the way it's going, because that means more security for our children in their future. I've always told my children that the best kind of future that they'll have is if they have anonymity on the internet, right? And so that includes how much data we gather on them on the internet and how it spreads and electronically. So I'm very grateful to you. I'm grateful that it's moved along as far as it has in the last year and a half. So I want to thank you and your staff and David and everybody else. So, and if you haven't had a chance, please go onto YouTube. Go to, what is the YouTube? Is it?
I just Google USBE media and then find the student data privacy section.
Go find the student data privacy videos. They are hilarious. I mean, how can you talk about FERPA and data privacy without being hilarious? Otherwise, you'd go to sleep, right? But David and Greg have done such a fantastic job of just humorously putting it together and teaching about student data privacy that I have kudos that we have comedy in that area. That's fantastic. So thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. Yes.
I also just wanted to make a comment. You know, we are grateful to the legislature too, for the resources they've provided for the support of this program, because very few programs get the same. We've got Chief Privacy Officer, we have 2 trainers, we have resources for 1 or 2 other contract employees, depending on, like, we have somebody who's helping with all of our contract collection. We have money for this application vetting as well as the metadata dictionary. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I'm anticipating that shortly we're going to have an audit on school fees, for example, and we sometimes get audits on other programs where there's a requirement in code for either us or the districts and charters to do certain things, but the resources aren't there. If you, and I talked to Senator Anderegg about this once, how if you want true state board compliance, oversight, professional development, saying this is how you comply, you pay for the resources to back it up. And so Senator Anderegg has even said to me at times, if, you know, I'd be happy, he agrees with it. There was a bill he was running last year where he wanted to say, if the legislature is going to mandate something, you have to fund it, you have to provide resources. And if you don't provide resources, then it's essentially null and void. Now, that didn't pass, and we all know the political, it doesn't happen. Oftentimes, these compliance requirements come in code and in you know, and then we're required to do it in board rule, but the resources aren't there to then get that water down the road to support the LEAs in what does right look like, you know, how do you, and so anyway, I have watched Whitney and her team make huge improvements, and in large part, that is because of the also investment, I think, that the legislature made in saying, we want the state board to be a leader and to have the resources to truly monitor this and to support. So that may be something down the road that we look at other priorities of the board. And for example, for school fees, we have no resources, no administrative resources or staff. That and so luckily, you know, we had our internal auditors who that is a resource, and they were able to provide that, but not something like what we have with Whitney, Greg. And actually, there's quite a few resources even beyond personnel. So anyway, great.
Chair, if I may.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm just going to piggyback off of what Angie said. Prime example, I think, of showing the legislature of how well things can be created and monitored and run when they mandate certain programs and things like that. And I want to thank them publicly as well. I mean, Ed Apropes, you know, they made sure that this was a priority, and I thank the chair of that committee and committee members for making that a priority as well. It was a huge project, and I know that it was a big concern from the very beginning when education started to bring in more technology for the last 8 years. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Whitney. Okay, and I guess you're staying. Item 2.9, data sharing agreements.
So this is a summary of the external requests that we have received. This first one by Ed Choice would like aggregate information. They are interested in just looking at numbers of participants in the Carson Smith Special Needs Scholarship. He does want it disaggregated a bit by school. So these are counts. Do you want me to go through each one, or should I leave it up for if you have questions on any of them?
I think we should we do one at a time?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So the first one is a request made, this is a Carson Smith, right? And so it's aggregate data, okay. Yeah. Board Member Brittany Cummins, did you have a question?
Just curious, the end product says this research will be used primarily for internal organization, so is that internal to Ed Choice?
True,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, any other questions on that agreement? If not, I'm seeking a motion.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I do have a question.
Yep.
Is there any way we could get information on, and maybe it's irrelevant, you can tell me if it is or isn't, but like, who are these requesters? Are they private individuals? Is it a for-profit company? Is it a nonprofit organization? Is it a researcher? And some of that you can tell, but some of it you can't. So,
typically, no, I do not go into the background of each of the organizations or researchers. They fill out an application, and then it's recommended that they appear or that they have a sponsor within USBE. But if you would like, I can go through these and find out a little bit more about them, or perhaps add something to the application asking if they are for-profit, nonprofit, those types of questions.
Okay, yes.
So did EdChoice have a sponsor or?
No. Going back to that summary sheet, there was no sponsor mentioned.
See that, sorry.
None of these have a sponsor
Okay.
that's listed.
Okay. Yes. Board Member.
I move that we approve the data request for Martin F. Lucan at EdChoice.
Okay. So the motion before us is to approve Martin F. Lucan's EdChoice data request. Any discussion to the motion? Seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Then the second one is Henry Miller Funding Educator, the College Monk. I'm trying not to. Okay. So this is for Principal and Educator, PII, which stands for Personal Identifiable Information. So any questions regarding that? Is there a summary sheet for all of these? Because normally there's like,
There was I have, yeah, there's one on board docs.
Are you talking,
this is all that I've got is what's there. Is there like individual?
This
sometimes
is-
it's broken down into, and I'm not seeing that.
No, this is all that the requester supplied.
So, well, don't we have to either?
doesn't get approved, then we won't give it,
Okay.
right, Whitney?
What's that?
If the committee and the board do not approve it, if they take no action, nothing will happen, correct? So
Or
I
do we
guess,
have to deny
do you have
it?
to say no?
I don't know.
No, I don't, I mean,
I
it has to be approved. So if it's not approved, then it would be no action. So what Whitney would have to just state is that the board has taken no action with respect to your request.
Oh.
And so I cannot provide you that data.
Okay, so there's a difference
You see.
between denying it rather than taking no action?
Because I'd like to just deny this, but I guess, is it the same?
The consequence would be the same.
Oh, okay.
They don't get the data.
Okay, so then the next one is Shelley Barnum. So we'll put on that one, no action taken by the committee. But I think they want action by the committee, though, is what I've been told. Like, they want some kind of direction by the committee as to which direction.
Oh, so for the full board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I move that we deny the request from Henry Miller, founding editor, the College Monk.
Okay. So the motion before us is to deny the data request by Henry Miller, founding editor, the College Monk. Okay, any discussion? Okay, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. So now we'll go to Shelley Barnum. This is for aggregate data. And any information, I mean, there's no sheets, because in the past you've put sheets in with each data point, nothing came?
Well, this because this is just one data point. How
So
it's just
okay.
a count of
So they're
administrators.
just wanting this, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Chair, may I ask a question?
Yep.
Whitney, do we already post how many, I mean, isn't it easy to find out how many administrators publicly? Isn't that already?
Well, these have already gone through a filter with data and statistics for existing public reports. So they have said that there are no existing public reports that will provide this information, that they would have to gather this information that just hasn't been gathered or hasn't been publicly reported yet.
Is that true or false?
Can't they just look at each?
Yeah, couldn't?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can't they just, I mean, it's a lot of work, but, I mean, if they're at Texas Tech,
Yeah.
okay.
It's just how many administrators does Utah have on the secondary?
I think it would be possible to find that out, but it would take a lot of time for some of these, where it would take someone here a very short amount of time. So it's a little bit of a public service and a transparency piece, and also a way to help with whatever their reasons are for wanting the data.
So she's just wanting how many administrators does Utah have on the secondary 7 to 12th grade level? Like, that's all that she's wanting is the number. Okay. So I'm looking for a motion. Yes.
I move that we approve the data request by Shelley Barnum.
Okay, so the motion before us is to approve the data request by Shelley Barnum. Any discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed.
And the motion for the board, I apologize, probably should be, and we recommend that the board
Oh.
approve. them.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll tack
We
that
forgot to
on.
do that in the last two, sorry.
And we recommend that the board approve.
Then that's it, because there's no meetings, just that
Okay.
they approve it also.
So the last one is Steve Christensen, Brigham Young University. This is for Educator PII. And he's wanting educator email addresses, including inactive educators. I have a really hard time giving personal information, even if it's an educator. Yeah.
Again, it's public information that they would,
Yeah.
it would be a lot of work for them to go and have to do it, but it probably wouldn't take very long. So it is public because most every teacher's email address is out there on a school website.
I'm not sure if sorry.
Is that all the data point that he's wanting is just because he's saying educator personal information? And did I, in the future, because we've done it in the past, but in the future, if we could also include the actual request from the people on there? So why would he ask for personal information? Oh.
The actual data request is in the next column.
Sorry, want me to answer that?
Yeah.
There are two ways in which we receive data requests. One of them is a very lengthy application that they fill
okay.
out. And another way is just through the data and statistics interface, and they enter in this information and nothing
more?
else.
Okay.
It's not as lengthy because they tend to not be asking for very much data. And so that's why you're seeing the difference. But whenever we have that application, you see the full application. And if it's just this, you just see this information.
Okay. And then we have one, I believe Rita would like to make public comment on this.
Thank you. Rita Hagren with AFT Utah, and I am one of those inactive educators. I am not currently teaching at a school, so I do not have a school email address. And when you do a Cactus lookup or an educator lookup on your website, it says not currently active. So he
Right.
has no way of getting my information unless you give it to him.
And that's the problem that I'm struggling with is giving, because he's saying inactive.
That would
as
be
well.
me. And that would be my
so-
personal private email addresses.
Yeah.
Yes. And also, it looks like this is a dissertation project for understanding why teachers do the attrition, which I think is a wonderful idea. But don't we have that going on now with Representative Moss's last bill that said you're supposed to do a survey like that yourself? Would this be redundant somehow?
Right.
Th-
Okay.
Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Well, those are. Okay. Board Member Belknap, did you have anything or a motion or anything?
No, because I actually, maybe you don't like it. I actually would like to make a motion that we deny this proposal.
Okay, so the motion before us is to deny the Steve Christensen Brigham Young University data request. Any discussion to that motion? Board Member Brittany Cummins?
So I'd just like to think about this a little bit from the perspective of what is the route that a genuine researcher should use? Like we talk about whose responsibility it is to solve problems in a society. Is it government's job? Is it a private entity job? Is it et cetera, right? And so we go round and round in circles about whose job is it. And so we've got a private entity, an individual trying to look at and solve a problem. And I think Rita brought that up. It's a great idea. And so how do we go about that? Solving problems if we don't have access to the information that we need to solve that. And so I'd just be curious, like, how would somebody ask these important and relevant questions without access to the people who have the answers?
So are inactive educators, are they listed somewhere? Like, could he look up and see who the inactive educators are and contact them?
No.
Or no?
I think it's possible that we have that information. Whether we should or not, that's up to the board.
And the other question is, just back to the point that Rita made, are we not already doing something like this?
I believe that UEPC has conducted a very thorough report of this recently, but
Okay.
that's as much as I know.
And Travis?
I asked him
Yes.
to come.
Travis Rawlings, Educator Licensing Coordinator for the board. The UEPC research proposal that was conducted last fall was put together, but the email addresses were not provided. The links to the surveys and those kind of things, those were sent from our office. So the links, the emails were not actually provided to UEPC.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention that Representative Moss's bill that Rita mentioned did not pass, but that was an idea to start requiring school districts and charter schools to collect this data as educators exit, and that we, the board, would provide a form, like a standard format or standard requirements for that survey that then we could start collecting and doing that. One other thing I wanted to give you as a background to keep in mind, I know in the past there have been some requests for educator emails for other purposes, such as reaching out for political purposes. So be aware that if you do provide emails or decide to do that, there's been other times when we have denied that in the past. And if you want to make distinction between the purposes and who it is and et cetera.
I do have a question. Would we even have inactive educators' emails? Because
Some
we might, but yes.
So Cactus part of the personal information that is stored in Cactus is it includes their email address, and that's been collected as long as I've been in this office, so 2006. And so if a person becomes inactive, we may not have their current email.
But you would have.
But there's something there.
Okay. So that's what you would release, basically,
Yeah.
is what?
The most recent.
The most recent that's been updated on Cactus. Okay, Board Member Belknap?
Yeah, I don't know that we have any protection for our educators at this point, once we've given that information. What keeps him from passing it to someone else as well?
Yeah. Okay. Board Member Brittany Cummins?
No, and I appreciate the conversation. Like I said, I'm not necessarily saying I approve this particular request, but what is our our stance and how do we facilitate good research? And I think that would be an interesting conversation to have.
I agree.
And then, if we do approve these particular ones, and I know they're small requests, but do they come with, when you actually execute the agreement, are there certain things, expectations of how to use the data, how to destroy it, how to, et cetera? I'm guessing those all occur.
Yes.
Okay, so, but I would think it would be interesting to converse on how are we going to help to facilitate research and important questions, answers to important questions. So.
Great. Okay. So the motion before us is to deny the Steve Christensen Brigham Young University data request. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passed unanimously. Yes.
Would it be possible to put Brittany's request on next agenda, or ask board leadership if that would be possible to have a discussion
Yeah,
on
I was going
a
to,
rubric, and maybe it can't be in a rubric because they're all unique.
or maybe have something that Whitney and their data privacy people work on as well.
Yes, sure, we can do that. You're asking for a rubric to prioritize data requests based on the usage and the organization and...
Or just, what was your,
Because it's not just, I don't know that it would just be in Whitney's wheelhouse, but the concept of so we've got important questions that need to be answered, and we all want answers to them.
Right.
But, we all want to protect the data and the individuals who are involved in it. And I guess it would be, what are some best practices moving forward for acquiring the information that is requested and needed? Is it always a data request? Because, as we heard from Travis, there was a way to do what the researcher wanted to do without releasing the information to the researcher, right? And so what are those best practices moving forward to help facilitate research, I guess, is the question. As a state agency, a data holder, how can we facilitate research projects? So.
okay. So do we need to take a motion on that, or that can just be a request, right?
I think
Okay,
Whitney and I
perfect.
got the gist, and we'd probably need to talk to some others. As you mentioned, it's not just in Whitney's, there's other people, but we could maybe talk about that as a superintendency or with a group, try and set up a meeting to see if we can have some ideas for options on how to solve that.
Okay. All right. We are done. So meeting is adjourned. Thank you.